Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the fuel tanks videos. We are going to be getting into all things Pro Seal, all the sticky gooey ooey. So stick around for some different tips, tricks, and tools that we learned about from other builders and found to be helpful along the way. I think I want to start out by saying really quick, don't panic about working with this much Pro Seal for the first time. Me personally, I didn't find it really that bad. If you go and read through all the directions really well to make sure you understand what you're about to be doing and that you have everything laid out well and that you're well organized before you get started, really it's not so bad. Stinky, yes. Messy, yes. And it definitely takes more time having to go and do all the Pro Seal everywhere. But I mean, really, to me, it was not so bad. And I think you could just treat it like any other part of the build. All right, so where to begin on this? Something we found very helpful before doing the Pro Seal when we were getting everything set up. Everything has to be cleaned. You can't have anything on it. And remember, all of these different ribs and stiffeners have all been labeled and numbered. You have an order for how, where they go and what you've final drilled and where it sits. We had these big pieces of cardboard still from one of the kits when it got shipped to us. And so what Tyler did is was able to then lay them all out. And then we just wrote on the cardboard the number for each piece next to the piece there so that we still had it all numbered and had it all laid out and we knew which was which without having the numbers written on anything. So it was all clean and ready to go into the fuel tank. And those huge pieces of cardboard worked out nicely because, again, we've got the spars there sitting on our huge work table, and so the big piece of cardboard just covered both spars nicely, and so we had another big flat surface to work with there and have all the pieces laid out and ready to go. And yeah, just labeled the cardboard so we know which piece was which. First silly thing that I might say is it was helpful to use 2 pairs of latex gloves. And you might be like, why 2 pairs? For the simple fact that after you've been out there working on doing this for a while, you're, odds are high wearing those latex gloves, your hands are going to sweat a bit. And now if you've gotten too much Pro Seal on one of the gloves, you need to swap it out or change it, or now you're trying to suddenly take it off so you can get something pulled up on your phone or your iPad if you're looking for an instruction or a YouTube video. If you've now taken it off and now you've got this wet, sweaty hand, trying to get a glove back on, a little bit tricky. Having the second set of gloves, you have your base layer glove, I guess, and then you have your Pro Seal glove on top. So it just made it really easy if I needed to rip the dirty glove off and either replace it or just take it off for a minute so I had a clean hand. Now I've got a clean, dry glove. I'm not having to take that off, and then I can easily get the clean, dry glove back into the messy glove or into a new glove if I need to, without having any difficulty. Because trying to wrestle with the sticky, if you're already dealing with Pro Seal and now you've got sticky or sweaty or wet hands, it's it can get weird. So that was something we found worked out pretty nicely, is having the 2 gloves to work with. The next big suggestion that somebody made that I love, well, let's see here. I guess it's 2 things. One, if you have your scale out there, because you need your scale to weigh out the Pro Seal, stick your scale into a plastic bag. You won't ruin your scale this way. You won't get Pro Seal permanently on your scale this way. And then we didn't have to worry about getting dirty if we got too much Pro Seal or something on it. You just swap out the plastic bag. So that was super handy. But the next thing was this. I think it was in one of the forums online, someone had recommended using cheap bathroom tiles to mix up the Pro Seal. And it was just genius. It worked so well for a couple reasons. So one, we'd get the little tiles, and then I just put the little rubber footies on them, just so that then if I set them down anywhere on the skin, it wouldn't scratch anywhere on the skin, since now the little rubber footies were there, and it also wouldn't slide around or move. So that was nice. But with the bathroom tiles, what's great is that it's a nice, hard, rigid surface for mixing up the Pro Seal, but it also then is very easy to clean. And so buy a couple, like I think we had 8. And what you'll see as we're doing this is that I'll mix up like one batch of Pro Seal and we'll sit there and work with it. And then when we've run out of that batch of Pro Seal, I'll hand it off or we'll set it aside and start making another batch right away on a clean tile. And so either, Tyler or I would clean up the one dirty tile while the other one mixed up the fresh Pro Seal. And it was just super easy to clean. It was super easy to mix everything. As you can see here, we used a little putty knife to just mix it up. It was like mixing paint or something. But it worked out really, really well because you're able to scrape anything off that you need to get mixed up, smear it all together really well, scrape off any to help apply it. But I really, really, really liked having the putty knife and then the bathroom tiles for mixing and applying the Pro Seal there. With applying the Pro Seal, so popsicle sticks definitely super handy. The thinner ones I found really helped a lot in a couple different ways in a couple different places. Having a rounded tip was great for in certain areas if you needed to kind of make a smooth edge. Think about if you're applying caulk, if you've ever done that in a bathroom, and then you smooth it out so you have a nice smooth curve to it. You can do that then with the rounded edge of the popsicle stick. Plastic bags, little small sandwich bags that I ended up using basically like an icing bag to apply the Pro Seal. I found it was really helpful to get it more precisely in certain areas. For example, like after you put these stiffeners on and now you want to seal around the edges, it was really handy to have these little icing bags that could really get in the edge there that you're trying to fill. If you've ever used caulk like to seal something in the bathroom, it's similar kind of concept. You're going to get in their edge and then you're going to smooth it out like with a popsicle stick to put a nice smooth seal there along any of the edges of the stiffeners. And that little icing bag worked out really well to try to get it in the little nook there along the edges. It was very easy, precise way to get in there. For those of you who've never worked with an icing bag, here's a quick little thing I did, just kind of showing a handy, easy way to do it based on how I've done it before, like with cakes. If you just get something like a red Solo cup and then you take the plastic bag and then kind of wrap it around it with one little end in the hole, after you've mixed the Pro Seal there on the tile, scrape it off of the tile there with the putty knife and then scrape it along the rim there of the cup to scrape it off the putty knife but into the plastic bag. So hopefully that makes sense and you can see it here. The more you can get it into that corner of the bag, the better, because then what you're going to do, as you can see here in this picture, is you're going to twist it off to try and direct all of the Pro Seal to come out the tip. Now, the biggest thing is don't cut too small of a hole, because then, don't ask me how I know this, the bag will just explode and you'll end up with this big glob of Pro Seal everywhere. Because again, it's very viscous and you can't try to force it through too small of a hole. So it might take a little trial and error. You want to get just the right size hole. I think if you were to cut about like a 1/4 inch off of the tip there, you can get it just right where now you have a big enough hole that it'll let it out, but small enough that it still gets you that kind of like pinpoint accuracy. It also then just worked out well for like applying the Pro Seal to the flanges of the ribs, because I would just kind of like squiggle it along the edge there, and then I could just take the popsicle stick and smear it back and forth to make sure that the Pro Seal was coating the entire flange there of the rib before we went and put it in. A quick little side note here in the middle of the build: if you've been enjoying my videos and you're thinking of getting started on your own build of any model of Vance aircraft, would you please consider going to the link below, planelady.com/referral, downloading and completing that form, and submitting it to Vance after you receive your empennage kit for any model of their aircraft. Vance will send me $100 as a thank you. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it really means a lot to know that you guys appreciate the effort that goes into these videos. You can also get merch like my Why Buy Planes when you can build them, t-shirts, hoodies, long sleeves, whatnot at planelady.com/store, or you can join us on Patreon. let's get back to the build. What else? Okay. Also, it's good to maybe have like one Pro Seal outfit, because no matter how hard you try, odds are high you're gonna get Pro Seal on something. So unless you want to ruin multiple shirts or shorts, maybe pick the one shirt you don't care about ruining, or one pair of shorts you don't care about ruining, and stick with stick with those. You know what? The Pro Seal already smells, so if there's any good news, it's like you won't be the stinkiest thing in the garage if you keep reusing the same clothes while you're doing the Pro Seal. On 18-5, step 6, it tells you to fabricate and install small plates made from scrap aluminum to close off these 3/16-inch diameter holes in the webs of the T1003 left, T1003B right, T1003C right. To close these off, they're holes that are used for the forming of the ribs. So it's not something that's part of the build, it's part of forming the actual piece of aluminum that you're using. And what we did instead of doing the plates is that, thanks to our builder friend Todd, we actually got some AN 470-86 rivets. They are big fat rivets that are 3/16-inch diameter, so they will fill those holes. So the rivets as they are way too long. You're only putting them through this thin rib. And if you were to go and try to rivet it right now, because there's way too much sticking out, you're going to have that folding over problem with rivets when you use them, that, they're way too long for what your purpose is. So you have to cut them down in order to then have it set properly and have that nice shop head there to make the good seal to seal these holes up. So using a pair of needle nose pliers to hold the rivet still, and then I just took a Dremel and went and cut the excess off, and it's just kind of eyeballing it. Again, we're just trying to put a rivet in there to seal a hole and then seal around it, but cut them down so you could see here about how much I cut off. And then you did need to have a different rivet set than to use with the rivet gun. So our friend Todd had gone and bought one of these for these universal head size 6 rivets, and he let us borrow it to use. And so we were able to go and then set all of those big fat rivets into those big 3/16-inch holes, and then seal around them with the Pro Seal to seal up these holes. So that's an alternative. I mean, again, you need to have the rivet set that would work with that. Either way, you're doing a little bit of work, but this just made a kind of a cleaner fill for the hole. We had the tool available to us, we had the rivets available to us, so we opted to just go for that and use that instead to fill the holes. One thing that we saw from a friend of ours, Rob, about taping off the inside there of the fuel tank to try to help not have it be super messy with excess Pro Seal everywhere. And so, you scuff along all the different spots where you're going to have the ribs and the stiffeners attached to the skins to, again, help the Pro Seal adhere. So what you can do is then tape off just outside of where the pieces were going to go, so that after we were done riveting, like Pro Sealing and riveting that piece on, like, say, the stiffener, then you can just peel it off and you have these nice clean crisp edges, and you don't have a bunch of extra Pro Seal in there. So that's what we did. We taped it off here, as you can see, like, everywhere, and again, like, that just worked out really nicely to keep it with a nice clean look and not have any extra Pro Seal in there that we didn't need. When we were riveting these stiffeners into place, we once again used the piece of steel angle that our EAA tech advisor had given us to borrow, and I've used that before in previous videos for things like the trailing edge for the rudder. It came in really handy because this piece that we happen to have is longer than the length of the skin, so we didn't have to worry about, like, adjusting it throughout the riveting. We were able to just line up each row once, and then what I did is I taped it down with just a little bit of painter's tape. It was just enough with the painter's tape that we had to keep it from moving and not sliding off of the angle while we were riveting. So that way we didn't end up with some sort of an oopsie because the skin slid off. It stayed on there, and that entire line of rivets all the way down the skin stayed on top of the steel angle while we were riveting. The only thing I will say is, for our particular setup, as I mentioned, we're using this piece of plywood on the sawhorses because our big table is currently occupied by the wing spars at this point because we were working on those at the same time. And the steel angle did extend a little bit off the end on both sides. And one thing I did find that I did have to go back and redo is that if I tried to rivet it on the steel angle while it on the part where it was overhanging the table, there wasn't enough really to support it to set the rivets properly. We ended up with a couple that were sitting proud that I then had to go drill out and redo. So if you're in a similar setup like we are, where the steel extends beyond the surface of whatever you're working on, I'd make sure that the part where you're riveting is actually sitting on the table. So shift it around as needed so that you actually have the table behind the angle there wherever you're riveting. When it came time to rivet the ribs on, it definitely was helpful having both of us there to work on it together. Trying to have one person do it, I'm not sure how well that would really work, with the exception of the outermost ribs, like the inboard and outboard most ribs, where you can easily reach them there on the edge with the squeezer, just because of the curve there on the tank, and especially when you're trying to work on the forwardmost holes there at the bottom, where, like I mentioned in the previous video, you kind of have to slide the tank out of the cradle in order to get the rivet gun to set flush there on those rivets. But another thing that definitely came in handy for a couple of the spots here when riveting in the ribs was that little rubber hose ring trick that I'd mentioned in a previous video to help kind of push against some of the flange. I think it was primarily on a couple of the holes where it was at the end of a section of rib flange. So like the very last hole on one side or the other. And maybe it was just me, I don't know. But it just, at least it seemed like it set nice and clean and a little bit better if we used the little rubber ring when we were riveting those. It will get covered in Pro Seal, and you will probably have to either A, clean it out with some acetone, or B, again, like I'd mentioned when I first talked about this trick, just get like a length of the hose so you can just keep cutting a few more little rings as needed. So, but yeah, so that little ring came in handy there for a couple of those spots. Another thing that we found super helpful while we were working on the inside of the tank was this little puck light. So it was actually a little camping light that we had, and just like with the scale, we stuck it into a little clear plastic baggie, so that way it also didn't get damaged by any Pro Seal that got onto it, and it didn't matter if any Pro Seal got on the bag because the light still just shone through the clear baggie. But it was very handy for a couple different reasons. I mean, one, if you see here, the easiest way we found to work on it was to lay the tank on its side there to be able to reach in and have somebody then working on the outside instead of trying to kind of hang over, like if we had it standing upright and then hang over and trying to look in it that way. Having it laying on its side just for us worked out a little bit better. But because of that, it cut off all of the overhead light that was coming in then from the ceiling lights. So it made it much darker in there. And for a couple things, like when I was setting the bucking bar up on the rivets when we were riveting them, but also then when we went in to add more Pro Seal to then seal along the edges of the ribs and seal along the edges of the J channel that went in there to make sure that the tanks were really well sealed. To have that light in there was just really, really helpful to be able to see where everything was going. Did I have everything in the right place? And did we actually get all the different edges sealed up as well as we wanted to? So if you have any sort of little light like that, basically small enough to like not get into your way, and it doesn't need to be super duper bright. It's just something to add that little bit of extra light in there while if you do work with it here on the side, just since you aren't going to have as much light coming in with it not standing upright in the stand. Another thing that came in handy, in particular in 18-5 steps 11 and 12, when you're attaching the J channel and the tank attach bracket subassembly to the tank, was a small mirror. And the reason for that was, you're sealing the edges of all these components after you rivet them in, trying to help make everything watertight. And when you're doing, for example, the stiffeners earlier on, because the ribs aren't in there, you have the skin like open, and so after everything's riveted in, you can very easily see both sides or both edges, like the forward and aft edge of the stiffeners, and easily go in like you saw earlier in the video with the tape and a popsicle stick, and just and you're done. But once the ribs are in and now this shape is formed, and you have the J channel in particular, and again the tank attach bracket subassembly, you have no line of sight to see the forward edge of either of those components. So you can't really tell if you've sealed everything along the entire edge of the J channel and that tank attach bracket subassembly, because you can't see it. But by having the small mirror that you could just stick in there, and especially the light is super helpful here, because again, if there's no light in there, it would be even more difficult to try to see. But the small light with the mirror could then illuminate that forward side of those pieces, so that you can easily see, okay, did I get all of it with some Pro Seal? Is there a spot where I missed it? And then be able to go in and actually make sure the whole thing is all sealed up along all the edges, to just help try to ensure that it is in fact, watertight. We stopped building after 18-5 step 12. The reason for that being that at the time when we built the tanks, we had not yet decided if we were going to go with an electronic fuel injection system in the plane, which would require us having return lines going back to both tanks. If we needed to have a return line, then we had to drill a hole for the fitting for the return line in the aft inboard tank rib subassembly. So that rib T1003B left and right. There'd have to be a pretty decent sized hole for one of the fittings to get into for the return line. And Tyler brought up a good point, which is that if we've already riveted that rib there onto the tank, and now we decide that we're going to go with a system that needs the return line, then we're going to be drilling the hole and making a fairly big hole with the unibit for that fitting. And all those shavings are going to drop down into the tank. And now we've got to worry about, we've got these metal shavings here in the tank, especially with that one rib sitting right above the tank attached bracket subassembly. Like I just mentioned earlier in the video, it's really hard to see down there, and we'd be relying on, a light and a mirror trying to see if we got all of the shavings out or not. And so we talked about it, and it's like, rather than have to worry about any of that, let's just leave that part off. We're not going to attach it until we've made our decision, and then we can always just go back and we'll attach it then and not have to worry about anything with the shavings. So we have decided that we are doing electronic fuel injection. We've got the pump and everything already in the fuselage. We've got all the lines in the fuselage, including the return lines. So everything's squared away there. And so now what's left is for us to go and drill the holes for the fittings, for the return lines in these two T1003B left and right aft inboard tank rib subassemblies. And then we can go and we'll rivet it on, and then do all of the testing for the watertight and airtightness and go from there. And so we just haven't circled back to finishing this part yet on the fuel tanks. We've, moved on with everything else. But we did just get more Pro Seal in our finishing kit that we just got recently, and that's specifically so that we can now go and finish up those fuel tanks here sometime in the near future. And after that, I will do one last video on the fuel tanks, going over what we did there and how the testing went, so that y'all can see what happened. Fingers crossed. I feel pretty confident after everything that we did that we're going to be okay, and we'll see if that's foolish optimism or not, but I feel pretty confident about it. Now, after we had already done our fuel tanks, Vans put together a video with Scott McDaniels showing how a professional goes and builds the fuel tanks. So he has his own suggestions and advice and does a nice walkthrough with it. But again, that came out after we had already built ours, so we didn't have this to go on. But I wanted to make sure to point it out to y'all, so that if you're doing this for the first time, if you want to see how a professional does it, you can go and check out their video, which I will link below. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so for more videos like these and to follow along as we build our RV-10.